Hello, dear students. Once again, we are back with a new chapter. The name of chapter is Respiration. The last chapter we have finished with was photosynthesis. Today, we will deal with respiration. Respiration and energy transfer. This is respiration, as you know well, is a important physiological process, which is just opposite to photosynthesis. Let us see the details of respiration. Now you know it well, the respiration, it is a catabolic process. As we have seen in the last lecture that photosynthesis was anabolic process, since glucose or complex substances like carbohydrates were synthesized using the simple substances like CO2, H2O. So it was a constructive process. It was energy consuming process because all this occur using the solar energy. But respiration, on the contrary, is a catabolic process where the complex substances like glucose, you can see over here, the complex substances like glucose, they are broken down into simple substances. And for their breakage or for their catabolism, oxygen is used, means glucose is oxidized into simple substances like CO2 and H2O with the release of energy, which is conserved in the form of ATPs. Some amount of energy is given out as exhausted as heat. Some is used in the synthesis of ATP. So respiration is a catabolic process in which the complex organic substances, they are oxidized into simple substances to generate energy. It is, in case of cellular respiration, it is of two types that you know well. You have studied up to 10th standard, that it is of two types, that is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. We'll see first how the process occurs. Indirectly, the plants, they breathe out. What happens during the oxidation of glucose? Oxygen is required. That oxygen is taken up by the plant from the atmosphere. Glucose is oxidized into CO2 and H2O with the release of energy. Whatever the amount of energy released, out of that liberated energy, some energy is given out as heat. While some energy is used in the remaining energy is used in the synthesis of ATP. This oxidation of glucose is not a single step reaction. It is a multi-step reaction. And gradually, during each step, the energy is given out. There is stepwise release of energy. Some amount of energy is exhausted as heat, while some maximum amount of energy is used in the synthesis of ATP. During respiration, oxygen is used because oxygen is must for the oxidation of glucose or carbohydrates. And simple substances like CO2 and H2O, they are released as a product of respiration with the release of energy. This occurs during the anaerobic organisms, as well as in case of aerobic organisms. In case some organisms are strictly anaerobic, they are obligate anaerobes, some are facultative anaerobes. Conditionally, they are anaerobic, they show anaerobic respiration. So in this way, there is exchange of O2 and CO2 during respiration. And this, we can call it as breathing. For respiration, plants get O2 because O2 is required for oxidation of carbohydrates, and they gives out CO2 as a product of respiration. Now in plants, wait, something went wrong. So for respiration in plants, O2 is required for oxidation of carbohydrates and gives out CO2 along with water as a product of respiration. So this exchange of O2 and CO2 takes place with the help of some certain organs. In case of plants, they are stomata and lenticels. Just like in case of animals, we have nose for the exchange for breathing purpose, through which we inhale O2 and exhale CO2, isn't it? So in the same way, plants also inhale O2, which is must for the oxidation of food or carbohydrates, and they exhale CO2 or use out CO2. And which are the organs over there? Stomata. In case of dicot, the stomatas are having their bean-shaped guard cells. In case of monocot, dumbbell-shaped guard cells are there of the stomatas. And other than stomatas, another one more organ is lenticels present on the stem surface, leaf surface, on the surface of fruit. It is absent only on the roots. On most of the parts, these lenticels are present, through which gaseous exchange occurs. And the plants, they breathe out, or rather, they take in oxygen and they give out the CO2, which is a product of respiration. Now, as we have seen that during respiration, when the complex substances are broken down into simple one, large amount of energy is given out. Some amount of energy is exhausted as heat, and some amount of energy is stored in the form of energy-rich molecules called as adenosine triphosphate or ATP. This ATP is referred as the energy currency of cell, because whenever energy is required, the ATP make it available for the cell. The adenosine triphosphate, as the name suggests here, it is the adenosine connected with 3 phosphate groups. Adenine plus ribose sugar form the adenosine connected with 3 phosphate groups, triphosphate. So hence named as adenosine triphosphate. Structurally, ATP appears like this. And when ATPs are used, this last bond, which is an energy-rich bond, also called a sigma bond, between the last 2 phosphate group breaks. The sigma bond is a high energy bond. It breaks, and due to breakage of bond, energy is given out, which is used for different metabolic activities of cell. And the ATP is converted into ADP. And this way, the ATPs make energy available for the cell. Okay, now how the ATP synthesis occurs? We have seen during photosynthesis that ATP synthesis occurs by the process known as photophosphorylation. So since it takes place in the presence of photons or light, actually ATP synthesis process is nothing but the phosphorylation, relation of phosphate group with ADP, that is phosphorylation. So process of synthesis of phosphate group with ADP is called as phosphorylation. So the process of formation of ATP is called as phosphorylation process. This phosphorylation process occurs in 3 ways. Photophosphorylation, as we have seen in photosynthesis. Substrate level phosphorylation we'll see here in respiration. Oxidative phosphorylation, that we'll also see that strictly occurs during respiration. Photophosphorylation, from ADP and inorganic phosphate, ATPs are synthesized using solar energy. That is called as photophosphorylation. We have seen in details with the types of photophosphorylation as cyclic and non-cyclic in the last chapter. And it strictly occurs in the chloroplast, granum of chloroplast. Okay. Now, substrate layer phosphorylation is the type of ATP synthesis where directly phosphate is related or added to ADP from any suitable substrate. From any suitable substrate, the phosphate is released. That released phosphate from the substrate is used up by ADP and ATPs are produced. That is called as substrate level phosphorylation. It occurs in cytoplasm as well as mitochondrial matrix. Third type is oxidative phosphorylation, which occurs strictly during respiration. Likewise, in case of photophosphorylation occurs strictly during photosynthesis, oxidative phosphorylation occurs strictly during respiration. So, What happens during oxidative phosphorylation? In photophosphorylation, we use solar energy. In oxidative phosphorylation, we use the oxidative energy, the energy which is released during the oxidation of food. That energy is used in the synthesis of ATP, then it is called as oxidative phosphorylation. ADP using energy released during the oxidation of a substrate like NADH2, FADH2. या रिड्यूस ह्या कोएन्झाइमचं जे ऑक्सिडेशन होतं, एनर्जी बाहेर पडते आणि ती एनर्जी एटीपी सिंथेसिसला वापरली जाते. केव्हा एनर्जी बाहेर पडते? ड्युरिंग द ऑक्सिडेशन ऑफ NADH2 and FADH2, which are the which are the coenzymes. हे रिड्यूस कोएन्झाइम जेव्हा ऑक्सिडाइज होतात त्यावेळेला त्यांच्यापासून जी एनर्जी बाहेर पडते ती एनर्जी वापरून ATP synthesis होतं. That is called as oxidative phosphorylation. It occurs in the inner mitochondrial membrane only. And in this way, the ATPs are synthesized. When the ATPs are used, what happens? Whenever the cell is in need of energy for its metabolic activities, the ATPs get hydrolyzed. ATPs the hydrolysis होतं. And when the ATPs are hydrolyzed, energy is released, which is used for the metabolic activities. Okay, this is about the formation of ATP and its use. Now we'll see the anaerobic respiration, also called as fermentation. Anaerobic, the name suggests here the condition of respiration. An means absent, aerobic condition means airy condition, oxygen. In absence of oxygen, the respiration occurs. It is called as anaerobic respiration. Fermentation is a type of anaerobic respiration where glucose is incompletely oxidized into CO2 and incompletely oxidized into ethyl alcohol, lactic acid. Likewise, it is not completely oxidized into CO2 and H2. It is incomplete oxidation of glucose occurs, and it occurs in absence of oxygen. So it is called as anaerobic respiration. It occurs in prokaryotes, in eukaryotes. It may be, if it is a fermentation, it occurs, its product is alcohol or lactic acid, it is a fermentation. And accordingly, it is referred as alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, where both the processes, fermentation is basically the process where complex substances there is a degradation of complex substances into simple ones, or in case of still smaller substances, using the enzymes produced by microorganisms. So it is an enzymic process. An end product is, and the types, names of the types are depending on the type of end product. If alcohol is an end product, it is called alcoholic fermentation. Lactic acid is an end product, it is called as lactic acid fermentation. Now we'll see what is fermentation. It is a chemical degradation of complex substances with the activity of enzymes produced by the microorganisms. So it is strictly enzymatic reaction. There is the microorganisms or the enzymes produced by microorganisms play a key role in fermentation process. Glycolysis is a common step for aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration. So naturally in fermentation also, glycolysis is a very first and common process where glucose is incompletely oxidized into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. That we'll see in detail. This is not a single step reaction. It is a multi-step reaction. We'll see in detail in the next lecture. So very first step of fermentation is glycolysis. If it is a lactic acid fermentation, only second step occur where the pyruvic acid is directly reduced into lactic acid. Since the end product is lactic acid, it is called as lactic acid fermentation. Actually, during lactic acid fermentation, first of all, the substrate is lactose. Lactic acid fermentation मध्ये substrate जो असतो तो lactose असतो. त्याचा hydrolysis होतं into glucose and galactose, आणि मग त्या ग्लुकोजचं ग्लायकोलिसिस होतं into pyruvic acid, आणि मग pyruvic acid is directly reduced into lactic acid. Since the end product is lactic acid, it is called as lactic acid fermentation. And the enzyme used here is lactic dehydrogenase or lactic acid bacterium. जो एन्झाईम इथे मी सांगितले की एन्झायमॅटिक प्रोसेस आहे, त्या ठिकाणी जो एन्झाईम वापरला तो कोणता आहे, लॅक्टिक डिहायड्रोजनेज और लॅक्टिक ऍसिड बॅक्टेरिया. सो इट कन्सिस्ट ऑफ मेनली 2 स्टेप्स. लॅक्टिक हे तुम्हाला पूर्ण डिटेलमध्ये नाही, पण फॉर नीट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू वी हॅव टू study it in details. One step is glycolysis, second is reduction. Okay, so glucose converted into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid by glycolysis, and pyruvic acid is reduced using the reducing power NADH2 into lactic acid. This is the lactic acid formation. We will see the alcoholic fermentation. It consists of 3 steps. It is a cellular respiration and does not involve oxygen. Fermentation मध्ये ऑक्सिजन ची इन्व्हॉल्वमेंट नसते, सेल्युलर रेस्पिरेशन आहे ते. आणि यामध्ये जर अल्कोहोलिक फर्मेंटेशन मीन्स द एंड प्रोडक्ट इज इथिल अल्कोहोल and it is completed into 3 steps. Decarboxylation is absent in lactic acid fermentation. This is the step seen in case of alcoholic fermentation only. First step is very common for any type of anaerobic respiration or aerobic respiration. Lactic acid fermentation मध्ये पहिली स्टेप ग्लायकोलिसिस, अल्कोहोलिक फर्मेंटेशन मध्ये पहिली स्टेप ग्लायकोलिसिस, आणि अरोबिक रेस्पिरेशन मध्ये सुद्धा पहिली स्टेप ग्लायकोलिसिस. ओके, सो इट ऑकर्स इन साइटोप्लाझम ऑफ सेल where glucose is broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid along with the formation of ATP and NADPH2, which is a reducing power. Then this pyruvic acid which is produced, it undergoes decarboxylation. याच्यामधून CO2 molecule pyruvic acid मध्ये निघून जातो, it is converted into acetaldehyde. And this acetaldehyde then undergo reduction into ethyl alcohol. And in this way, the alcoholic fermentation occur. For commercial production of alcohol, alcohol is produced by alcoholic fermentation process. I think here we should stop. In the next lecture, we'll see the aerobic respiration, where we'll see that in the mechanism of aerobic respiration consists of 3 steps. One is glycolysis, which is common for aerobic and anaerobic. So very first step is glycolysis. Second is Krebs cycle, and third is electron transport system. And in the next lecture, we'll see the glycolysis in detail. So here we'll stop. Thank you. Thank you very much.